Well, Citizen Kane certainly is my favorite film, and I always list it as the greatest film of all time, even though I think that any kind of list like that is completely silly and ridiculous. On another day, I might pick, who knows, something like 2001 or Vertigo or Raging Bull. But Citizen Kane is important symbolically because it represents one opportunity that a director got to make a movie with total control in the Hollywood system at a time when that was not done. And to this day, the holy grail of directorial contracts has been the so-called final cut. As the French developed the auteur theory and began to focus attention on the director as the author of a movie, Wells became kind of their patron saint because he got this contract in 1939. He made Citizen Kane under such a contract, and it was a great film. So the film is, I think, on all of these lists of greatness, not only because it is a great film, but also because it is a great symbol for filmmakers. At the age of 24, without paying any dues, Orson Welles got a contract that everybody in Hollywood would have died for. Every director in Hollywood wanted final cut. A few of them had it if they had enough power, somebody like Cecil B. DeMille. But Welles got it all without, from their point of view, having proven that he could do it. When he first arrived in Hollywood with that contract, the trade papers were filled with snide remarks about the wonder kid from Broadway. He was going to come in and show them all how to do it. They were hoping for him to fail. They knew that his original production, Heart of Darkness, had been shelved. They knew that Citizen Kane was not the first project he had worked on. They knew that he was desperate to make it work. He had kind of a brash and arrogant manner about him. They felt he'd gotten too much too soon, and so they never really felt comfortable with him as an artist. Then what happened was his second film was not a success. The Magnificent Ambersons, which is considered to be one of the greatest films ever made, was butchered by the studio in his absence when he was off in South America on a wild goose chase involving a project that never really came to fruition. And then after that, he got this reputation for never following through, for being irresponsible. You couldn't count on him. It wasn't necessarily a fair reputation, and books and books and books have been written about Welles and about his career and about his personality. But nevertheless, throughout the rest of his career, he very rarely got his hands on those tools that he needed to make films. In a few cases, such as The Trial, he was able to make a film with complete control and with his hands on the tools that he needed. But in general, his films are a series of compromises and projects that were never quite completed, unfinished projects. He left 3 or 4 films in various stages of completion at the time of his death. And only in the case of certain films such as A Touch of Evil and The Trial, and for my way of thinking, Falstaff, and to a lesser degree, his Macbeth and his Othello, and then even lesser films still like The Stranger, which nevertheless is a lot of fun, did he show facets of the genius that was all together there at the first time in Citizen Kane. When the movie first came out, it didn't do a lot of business because the Hearst press had more or less succeeded in suppressing it. It couldn't play in a lot of chain theaters. It couldn't play in the Radio City Music Hall, for example, and it lost money on its first release. It only later got all of the worldwide acclaim and attention that it has now. For those first audiences, I think there was a feeling that they were seeing something special. The original critics were very much in favor of Citizen Kane and praised it in very, very outspoken terms. Some of them called it, even at the time, maybe the greatest picture that had ever been made. But audiences would have also found things that were quite unfamiliar to them. For example, the shock, almost like a bucket of cold water in the face, of the March of Time newsreel at the beginning, which performs the function of telling us the whole story first so that then the movie itself can repeat it. People would have also been rather startled by the lack of the basic cinematic language that had grown up since the days of Griffith. Master shot, over-the-shoulder close-ups, 2 shots, reestablishing shots, reverse shots, all of that grammar that was very convenient to the filmgoer. The fact that what you were supposed to be looking at on the screen would be in focus and the rest of the screen might be out of focus. What was before or behind the subject would be kind of hazy compared to the subject itself. Well, in this film, everything was in focus most of the time. You had to decide for yourself what to look at. There were long takes. The actors had the freedom to move around within the space as they did on the stage, which was what Welles wanted for them. And you also have these wonderful transitions using either sound or enormously audacious flash forwards in order to get from one part of the story to another or from one location to another. The movie is right there in front of you as a movie. What's always amusing to me is that Wells and Toland said they wanted utter realism. Realism was their goal. And to me, this movie is not realistic, it is stylistic. It takes realism and it elevates it through the use of its editing techniques, its sound techniques, and its visual techniques, so that it's very much a movie. We are aware at every moment that we're looking at a movie. We don't think we're looking at real life, no matter how much they talked about realism. I don't really believe the audience identifies with Charles Foster Kane or really likes him very much. I know that I don't. I love the movie, but it's a movie about a man who's very hard to like, and I think one of the key images in the picture is that early one in the newsreel that shows him in the wheelchair seen from behind the fence at his estate. There's a sense when you see this movie that you're going to get the inside story of a famous, rich, powerful man who wants to hide it from you. And that's the part of human nature the movie appeals to. It doesn't appeal to our love of Kane or our identification with Kane. It identifies with our curiosity about Kane, about anyone like Kane. It suggests that it's going to tell us secrets, that it's going to tell us the inside lowdown. And that's what's fascinating. The narrative device of the inquiring reporter is brilliant because it carries us into all of these flashbacks and allows us to understand why we're meeting all of these different people with their stories about Kane. And at the end, your hand closes on nothing. Rosebud really explains nothing. But the search has been dazzling. The movie is consistently entertaining in a visual way and in a narrative way. So that's what's important. It's not that we like Kane or that we even feel very sorry for him at the end. It's that we're fascinated by guys like that. I think Orson Welles probably was a genius, and he would certainly agree with that statement. But on the other hand, despite the fact that he did have this Final Cut contract and was the auteur behind Citizen Kane, the movie could have never been made, and none of his great work could have been made without the collaboration of wonderfully gifted craftsmen, technicians, and artists that he worked with. Citizen Kane could have never happened without the cinematography and the visual plan by Greg Toland. It couldn't have happened without the music of Bernard Herrmann. It couldn't have happened without the screenplay by Herman Mankiewicz, and only co-authored the screenplay to one degree or another, and according to Pauline Kael, was the really the dominant author of the screenplay, but he was also the source of a lot of the material in the movie. Then you had Linwood G. Dunn's optical effects. You had Vernon Walker's special effects. You had Perry Ferguson creating amazing sets on no budget at all, so that the movie is one of the most visually inventive films we've ever seen. You have Robert Wise as the editor, who deals with all of those incredible transitions, and sometimes just one or two frames can make the difference between a cut that works and a cut that doesn't work. Then you have all of those actors who were incredibly gifted and who came out of radio and came out of theater, and we're all trying this out for the first time. I think that's one of the important things about the movie, is that everybody involved in the acting side of the film, with a few minor exceptions, were in their first film, including Orson Welles himself. And all of the collaborators were basically young people who were excited by the chance to try to do something new. And certainly leading the spirit of that was Greg Toland as the cinematographer, a man who volunteered to work for this movie, who found it exciting to work for a director who had never worked before, because he felt this was an opportunity to try out some of his own theories, stuff that he had started with earlier with experiments on deep focus in The Long Voyage Home by John Ford, and who in this movie really kind of introduced a new cinematic language that would influence movies from then on, and would especially influence the look of that particular American film genre, film noir. All of the film noirs of the 40s owe something to Citizen Kane, as well, of course, as to The Maltese Falcon. So I think Welles was a genius, but among the things he was a genius at was choosing the people that he worked with. I think we should revisit Kane in the same way that we revisit all the great films of the past. The 20th century was the first century that was recorded on film from day one until the very last day of the century. No other century has been recorded on film. Think how interesting it would be to see a film from the 1700s or from the 1500s. Any film at all would be fascinating to us. And what bothers me about a lot of younger film goers is that they don't really have much of an instinct for cinema history. In the days before home video, and indeed in the days before television, people went to repertory theaters, they belonged to cinema societies, you went to the campus film club, You saw old movies and foreign films because they were programmed. Then suddenly home video came along and you started going to the local video store and just renting a hit from 6 months ago. So that a lot of people I talk to kind of think that cinema history begins with Star Wars. They don't realize the great heritage of American and foreign films. They're closed off to black and white, and I prefer black and white to color. I think it's more stylized and more mysterious. They're closed off to acting styles that are not totally realistic. They're closed off to movies that don't move at a breakneck speed. They have little appreciation for the arc and the patience of the arc of a narrative storytelling technique. And for all of those reasons, a movie like Citizen Kane is an eye-opener. It shows you that great movies were made in the past and that great artists and great performances are there waiting to be discovered.